This was my conference weekend. It was a conference-free zone. I was kind of so overwhelmed, as you guys probably noticed on the newscast last week, just by the Michigan and everything, and just, staying up late and reporting and stuff. I'm like, I'm not going to watch conference. I'm going to watch RFM, right? So when I say that you took one for the team, you really did, because I was in a place where there was not very much cell service. So I just kind of hit and miss on my phone, and some of my friends texting, and of course your program. So
this is where you were?
That is, I took those pictures on my phone. Can you believe it? It's Jackson Hole area.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, like, talk about just good for the soul. And I kept thinking, wow, I could be at home. I could be glued to the TV. I could be watching conference, or I could be doing this. I mean, it was incredible. I have to say, it was amazing.
And here I was slaving away in my underground bunker.
No, I was really worried about you. I would have sent you a DoorDash, but you don't tell anybody where you live.
That's true, I don't.
Anyway, to me, this was one of the bigger stories, probably the biggest story of all of conference. And of course, I have Oprah up there, who famously says, you get. This is the opposite. You don't get a temple. You don't get a temple. And especially you do not get a temple. That's right. We are not going to have temple announcements at this session of conference on Sunday. And I have some theories about it even going forward. So let's listen to President Oaks. This was the final address where President Nelson always gleefully announced the temples, right? He had his lighted pen. He'd kicked Wendy out of bed, and he'd written down the places where Jesus wants his new house. And we were debating, will this happen? Won't it happen? So everybody was, riveted to what President Oaks would say. Let's find out.
My loving brothers and sisters, thank you for your prayers in my behalf. I have felt them. The doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints centers on the family. Essential to our doctrine on the family is the temple. The ordinances received there enable us to return as eternal families to the presence of our Heavenly Father.
Can you make this 1.5, Bill?
As of the April 2025 General Conference, President Russell M. Nelson had announced the construction of 200 new temples. He loved to announce new temples at the conclusion of each General Conference, and we all rejoiced with him. However, with the large number of temples now in the very earliest phases of planning and construction, it is appropriate that we slow down the announcement of new temples. Therefore, with the approval of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, we will not announce any new temples at this conference. We will now move forward in providing the ordinances of the temple to members of the church throughout the world, including when and where to announce the construction of new temples.
Wow, there is so much to unpack in that.
President Nelson died just in time. I'm starting to wonder about the circumstances of his demise.
Yep, it was a little suspicious that it was just a few days before those 15 to 18 new temples were going to be announced, I think. And we're going to talk about that if we can go back to the slides. So people were very surprised right away on Faithful social media and Post-Mormon social media. People started saying, what did he say? What does he mean? What's happening? Faithful social media kind of arrived very quickly at the idea that it is because there is no prophet right now. There is no president of the church. That is the person who receives the revelation from Jesus as to where his new house will be built. And so, of course, they cannot announce them. That was one of the things that kind of came up. So it was all over headlines. Church of Jesus Christ is slowing down. The recent surge of new temples, the church leaders opt to slow down. They're all calling it a slow down, right? Because it's been going at breakneck speed for 7 years. 200 new temples. No one is ever going to top that at all.
That's because President Nelson was the best prophet ever.
Well, he's the only one so far that had a lighted pen. That might have something to do with it, and his notepad. So some of the comments that I thought kind of represented how people were feeling. This person says, guaranteed, if Nelson was alive, he would have announced more today. And this is a
Yes,
question. We have
absolutely.
been making predictions about this. The timing of this pause with Nelson's passing makes it 100% clear that it was all about Nelson announcing as many temples as possible while he was alive and one-upping Hinckley, who held the record before him and who repeatedly shot him and his ideas down in the public. So this is, I tend to agree with everything this person said. Another person said Oakes has the list of temples to be announced that Nelson wrote just last week, crumpled up in his pocket, or maybe he burned the evidence already. And this is a big question. Was there already a list of temples that were going to be announced? Or was there even a pre-recorded talk? I know they do these things a month or so in advance with that list of temples at the end of the talk, like he always does.
Can you go back to that slide? Because I want to talk to you
Sure.
about that. First off, I love the picture. I think that picture is of President Hinckley. At
Yep.
that time, he gave Elder
With his
Nelson that famous
cane.
caning.
Yeah.
And he
I
seems
know.
to be thoroughly enjoying it too.
I feel like the lighted pen is Nelson's, tit for tat with the cane. He was so beloved with his cane. Nelson has the pen. Everyone has to have a prop. I don't know
I
what
thought
Oakes
making
would
Nelson
do.
pull his pants down was going too far, though.
I feel like Oakes is going to have a gavel, right? That'll be appropriate. And he'll just kind of pound it whenever he says something.
Can I just say that the way Oakes says it, I think it's crystal clear that there were more temples to be announced.
Yep.
What does he need the
We're gonna go in
of all the other apostles to not announce any temples if there's no temples to be announced?
exactly.
By the
And
way,
we're
this is
gonna-
all Rebecca.
We're going to
Rebecca
read that
filled
quote
my
again.
ear with this afternoon on the phone. So let me
I
turn it
did.
back to you because this is an astonishing insight you've come up with.
I was ranting because, I share all my conspiracy theories with RFM and Bill, but no, if you dissect his words, of course I made this. Here is President Nelson with his list that he would have been presenting. I Googled what are the worst places in the world or the hardest to get there. Antarctica, Death Valley. There's a place called Point Nemo that is the hardest to get to in the entire world. So of course that's just a joke. And then I have the smiling Jesus that says, Russell, dude, 200 temples is excessive. I was totally kidding. You thought I was serious? Dude, honestly, 200 temples, if you really think about what that means. So here's what RFM and Bill are talking about. President Oakes said, with the approval of the quorum of the 12 apostles, we will not be announcing any additional temples at this conference. So, other people have figured this out. Someone else says, why would there need to be approval to not announce new temples? The only reason I can think of, Nelson had a list of new temples ready to announce when he spoke on Sunday. And after he passed, the 12 decided to shelve that list. Another picture here of the quorum of the 12 saying, scrap the list, scrap it. All those in favor of scrapping it, please manifest. And
Now, all of that makes absolute sense. It's almost unanswerable. Obviously, that's what happened. It would be remarkable if that's not what happened. But then you took it a step further and said, well, what does that mean then?
Yeah, and Bill had a point. We talked earlier. Why don't you bring that up, Bill? There is a possible reason for asking for approval, but I just feel like, he went to them and said, look, Nelson has this list. I think we all need to agree that we're not going to read it. We're just going to kind of have a moratorium. But Bill, you had another thought, more procedural than I was aware of.
Yeah, there's two things going on here. So first is, I think you're right. By the language of how this was worded, there's a list. And we need to make a call here that we're not going to proceed forward with the list. And I need all of you to join with me in, are you okay with the decision to scrap the list and to move forward without announcing any new temples? And that happened. And you guys are pointing to that. So what I'm about to say does not scratch that at all. Some folks might ask, why does he need the approval of the rest of the apostles? He's the new leader of the church. Well, no, not yet.
Mm-hmm.
So because he falls back into the quorum of the 12, now there's a quorum of 14 apostles because the new one hasn't been called and the two from the first presidency have gone back in. That quorum has to act in a unified manner. So Oakes does have to have the apostles' approval for any change, anything that gets done. He's not the prophet of the church at that moment. But still, asking for the approval means there were temples to be announced, and you need everyone to be on board to scrap the list. You don't need everyone on board to announce what was never going to be announced anyway.
Right. Or at least put the list in abeyance. And I would expect the list occurred at a minimum at the end of his talk, which President Nelson probably already had written. It was already either he wrote it or someone else did, and it's printed out, and it may have even been already recorded, because there were some questions as to whether they would play his last recorded message in General Conference, if indeed it had been recorded earlier. But they didn't.
But they didn't. And that's exactly right. I'm positive that there was a list. And it's not just a list. In following all of the temple building that I do and talking to all the people who ask the question of church lawyers and other officials, why does the temple have to be here? Or why does it have to look like this? All the towns that I work with want to know that. And the answer they're given every time is, Jesus wants this specific temple in this specific place and has given that information to our prophet. This is not just a list of temples that President Nelson came up with. This is God, Jesus, demanding his house to be built here. So the idea that President Oaks and the other apostles could crumple that list from Jesus, right? From Jesus to Nelson, that really says something, don't you think?
What do you think it says?
Maybe they don't really believe in prophetic ability. I'm not sure, but
yeah, if Jesus really gave this list of temples through his mouthpiece, Prophet and President Nelson, then who are these people to brush it aside and not announce it in General Conference?
It seems like you would want to honor the man as prophet who received revelation to name the next 11 temples, whatever it was going to be. And what they've essentially said is, one, as you point out, one is, we actually don't run by revelation. We tell you guys this works by revelation, but that Nelson guy was just out of control on temple building. And if you're a believer out there and you go, no, we have a prophet, this works by revelation, then you have to wrestle with, why did these 14 men, the moment Nelson died, they go, we're done with this. I don't care if God himself told Nelson where those 11 temples are going. This was out of control. We're done.
This is what they did with that list.
ooh, there it is. Yep. Can you imagine? I wish I had that list. I think it was going to be 18. I think that would have taken it up to a cool 400. Can you imagine those towns going, whew? I mean, in fact, I actually, what?
Rebecca, this is such a great insight that you've come up with, but think about it. It was more important to President Oaks to put the brakes on the temple building than it was to reconstitute the first presidency in time for conference.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about why, but I will say that the individuals that I work with in temple building, Cody, Heber, Lone Mountain, Fairview, almost every single one reached out with this news and said, what was it all for then? Why my town? Why? It really does ask that question. What was it all for? And as we get into it, we'll kind of understand here. So just 2 weeks ago, there was a big celebratory article, a look at the 200 temples announced by President Nelson and each one's current status, right? The news is portraying this as a positive thing. A lot of us understand how it can be very problematic. And I think President Oaks understands this all too well. So here are the stats, the most recent stats. Of the 200 temples that he announced, right? Getting up there every conference, hearing the cheers, right? 28 are dedicated. 28 of the 200. 4 scheduled for dedication, 56 under construction. Now that probably includes Heber, where they just barely dug into the ground and then an injunction stopped them. So construction doesn't mean close. It means, they own the plot and they're starting to do something on it. 2 are scheduled for a groundbreaking. 29 have site location identified and renderings published. That doesn't mean it's a done deal. That means it could be in court for years. Site, identified. We all know what can happen from there. And then 17 temples with only locations identified. That doesn't mean that you've got that okay with the city. We all know these processes. They take so long. And 64 announced temples are still, basically, he just threw the name out there. So if that right there doesn't give you an idea of what President Oaks was probably thinking, like, crap, this is a huge problem. And I'll show you why it's an even bigger problem. So President Nelson, in an article, explained why. Why do we have to build all these temples? Why are we building temples at such an unprecedented pace? Why? because the Lord has instructed us to do so. This kind of follows up on what I said so before. The Lord is telling President Nelson he doesn't want to announce all those temples. It's God talking to him. And yet that list, as we just saw the visual with RFM, was crumpled up and thrown away.
No questions asked. So that's what passes for revelation in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 2025. Today's revelation, tomorrow's garbage.
Wow.
God
Put
is-
that on a t-shirt.
God is unchanging. So Nelson is God's prophet. He's from God's lips to Nelson's ear. And God is telling Nelson, build temples, build temples, build temples. And then this last go round, there's more temples to build. And suddenly Nelson dies. And God goes, yeah, that guy's out of the picture now. I think I'd like to do things. I was not the one who wanted to rush with things. It was that guy. So now that you guys are in charge again, can you guys, for heaven's sake, knock off all this temple building? That's such a strange thing if you believe the church is true.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how God wants to do exactly what you want to do. And it also makes you wonder what else will be dialed back that Nelson put into place. So as I said before, this is what the Lord wants, as Nelson said in that article, has been the battle cry for temple building everywhere, even to the point where in, was it Fairview? Or Lone Mountain, Fairview, I think. One of the church lawyers said that God lives on the second floor. It's so specific. It is his house. He wants his house in a special place. He wants a steeple. This is a picture from one of the meetings about the steeple, right? Where this woman was saying, I was married in the Boston Temple and it didn't have a steeple. Was I married? Sure. But was it diminished? Yes. And then she kind of nudged her husband and had him hold up the thing, her marriage, her married life has been ruined because of no steeple. So I'm saying this is a big deal. They have used this against unsuspecting people everywhere to say, this is our faith. These are our beliefs. This is what God says to us. And they've used it like a sword. And now it's been thrown in the trash. This is why I have a problem with this. And I think it's a really big deal.
I'm sure it's because there was no steeple that her married life is in a shambles.
We don't know.
I'm sure she has nothing to do with that.
We don't know. We have no idea what's going on. But we did sort of look at social media, what different people were saying. Did he literally just say they will no longer announce temples in public? Okay, so we're going to get into the statement because there's lots of different ways to read it. Somebody else says, I'm guessing they want to try to avoid all of the local backlash and opposition. It's likely new temple announcements won't happen until everything is permitted and approved. The Heber Temple groundbreaking was done 3 years ago, right? And there's an injunction right now. So
this was one of the problems that you'd mentioned to me, Rebecca, is just the fact that they're announcing them. Because as soon as they announce them, people are starting to get it wise because of your efforts, Rebecca Bibliotheca, and all the work you've done exposing how the church takes advantage of neighborhoods in order to build temples there and circumvent the rules or bend them or do all this deception. Why would you announce them in advance to give that much more warning to the community where you're planning on building one of these behemoths, excuse me?
Yeah,
why would you do that unless you're like Nelson up here wanting all the adulation and you've got Oaks going, what are you doing?
Yes.
Stop it.
Yeah, this is what I think. President Oaks is a lot more pragmatic. I think that he gets it. And I think that there's been a lot of damage done with how many temples have been announced. And like you said, avoiding the backlash, right? I'll give you an example. This is Flagstaff, okay? Flagstaff was announced last April. We're going to build a temple in Flagstaff. Well, that is a dark sky extraordinaire area. They have STEM programs. They have national observatories. They are dark skies and very, scientific backing, scientific reasoning. Hours after this was announced on Reddit, there's lawsuits. We're going to have to sue. There's a temple coming. Over here it says, get a hold of Rebecca Bibliotheca, right? Hours later, here is the public outcry. Here is the petition. And honestly, the announcement, none of this will probably happen for 5 years. But as soon as it's announced over the pulpit, people get wind of it and they're on guard based on, I would say, all of our efforts, just to have people be more aware of what's going on in their town and pay attention to their town council.
Yes.
Why would you want to announce it out loud and have this happen?
But
This
it's
is
your
why
effort, though. You got an award for
Right.
always talking about the temple.
I did
You know,
get an
from
award.
Porch Time Mormons, you
I
got a
did.
very special award from them
I did.
because of your insistence on covering more the temple story like you have.
You
And I wanted
will
to ask you, how
never let
how
that
did it make
go.
you feel when you saw that message saying, somebody get a hold of Rebecca Bibliotheca?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how I felt. And then somebody else mentioned Mormonish, because that was always our goal, talking about temples. And honestly, we fell into it with people contacting us just to find out, what are Mormons? What is happening? We are at a loss, which they are, right? They're being told their God, the Mormon God, insists on a temple here. People are trying to be respectful. So our goal was always, if a temple is announced in your town, that you can find some resources online and decide if it works for your town and your area. That's great. And a lot of temples do. I would say the majority of temples do. But if it doesn't, and there are some concerns, find some resources, know what to do, be savvy, be aware, attend your city councils. So the fact that Flagstaff knew right away to maybe,
Yes.
watch a Mormonish episode or
Mhm.
Nemo, any of that, I'd say my work here is done. And maybe, I think, if you listen to what, and we'll read the statement again in just a minute as I finish out here, where it said, temples will be announced. It doesn't sound like they will ever be announced in conference again to me. He said announced at this conference. Could that mean this venue, this avenue? I mean, imagine if a temple is just kind of announced locally to stake leaders, neighbors get an announcement on their door to come to a meeting. That's all anybody knows about it, right? There's not this big bullhorn.
Mhm.
Beware, this is coming, or don't beware. That's the thing. It works for some towns. Another thing is avoiding embarrassment, right?
Yes.
Russia, everyone went crazy. Shanghai, oh my God, until the government's like, yeah, I don't think so. Even Dubai, right? These fantastic destinations, and nothing happens. And
Mm-mm.
people notice on the faithful side. They really do. They're like, whatever happened to that, So avoiding embarrassment of lawsuits, injunctions, temples not being built. There really is no good that can come out of announcing it publicly, except for a little bit of rah-rah. But there have been so
Right.
many temples announced. I think the rah-rah factor is
Mhm.
over.
Yeah. The
So I think
rah-rah is wah-wah. Hey,
rah-rah is
Rebecca,
wah, wah,
before you
wah,
go on to the
wah.
next thing, I just want to say, on behalf of me, on behalf of Bill, on behalf of this entire audience, we owe you a debt of gratitude,
Oh,
because you are the one who's done this. It's not all of us. You always try and say, yeah, all of us have worked on it. No, we haven't. It's all been you. You are the cause. You are the cause. And I just want to give you an ovation for that. And I hope everybody will join me
oh,
at
that
home
is so
or wherever
kind.
you're watching the show from.
That is
Yes,
so
Bill.
nice.
Bill. There we go.
But I
Bill
will say,
is.
do you know what it is?
That's
Whoa,
okay. Bill was clapping for Minnie there.
that sounded terrifying.
I was wondering why Bill wasn't clapping. It's because he's trying to
He
find the
was
knob,
playing that. You know
the
what I
right
will say
knob.
though? It's the people. It really is just the people getting to know these residents. They're our friends, right? Getting to see what's happening and just helping them maybe, make things a little better. That's what it's really about. So I'm going to read this one more time at the end here. However, with the large number of temples now in the very earliest phases of planning, we talked about that, it is appropriate that we slow down the announcement of new temples. Therefore, with the approval of the Quorum of the 12, and as we talked about, we believe that's because there was a list that they crumpled up and are not going to announce. We will not announce any new temples at this conference. Okay. People have been trying to dissect this at this conference, at General Conference ever again. We talked about some of the reasons that may not be the case. We will now this is the part I want to talk about. We will now move forward in providing the ordinances of the temple to members of the church throughout the world. Okay. He didn't say we're building a temple. He said we will provide the ordinance of the temple to members of the church throughout the world, including when and where to announce the construction of new temples. Now that is really interesting wording. They don't say things by accident. And based on some other things that I've heard, I have several different sources. I have some theories about this. I'm just going to very quickly go over. One thing I think is that temple locations are now going to be very secret, like we talked about. Now, I recently had a temple connection reach out to me and say there's a new temple going in Texas, and they are hell-bent on keeping this absolutely secret. Here's the address, right? I love that kind of stuff, right? But the issue with that is not only are they keeping it secret, if there are members of the church involved in city government, they are telling those members, don't let anyone know that you are connected to the church, right? So this is the inside man that works so well in Cody, Wyoming. Could it be that they'll choose locations for temples where there is an inside man? That works very well, right?
And
And
by
they
that,
want
you mean a Mormon on the city council or
Yep.
in the planning department or something?
Exactly. Or in Bakersfield, the city manager has just been made the stake president about a year ago, things like that. So I guess he gives the announcements about the temple as the stake president and the city manager. Anyway, laying low, right? Kind of keeping it just on the down low like that. Another prediction that I have that seems to kind of be backed up by this statement is more of a meeting house level temple, meaning bare bones, absolutely simple, not opulent, looks just like a meeting house, especially in Africa. We're going to talk about Africa again, where opulence is not a good look. And I have heard these rumblings that something happened in Africa, whatever that would be. Could it be members saying, why are you asking me for tithing when you have this castle, this opulent building here with a fence around it? Could it be governments looking at the building? Whatever happened, and I don't know. I just know that something did. Maybe somebody out there knows.
This all sounds very, I don't know, Area 51-ish.
It does sound Area 51-ish. That's right.
How do
Area
you know
Rep
something
51.
happened if you don't know what it was?
How can I know, right? I can only know what I know, but I'm just saying whatever it was has resulted in this concept of a much lower profile temple, okay? And I would even take it to the next extreme here. I can't read through the
Do you have
chat.
are there some diagrams or designs for a lower kind of temple that you're talking about?
Yeah, but I'm going to keep.
But you don't
things-
have those?
Oh, well, I'm not saying I don't have them. I'm just keeping them.
You're
But
not
it's
gonna
an
show
idea.
those?
It's a concept. And I'm saying that it may be tried out in the United States with a temple before it is tried out other places, but low profile, there are lots of benefits to that. Other ways to receive temple ordinances and blessings outside of a traditional temple. I'm not the only one that thinks this based on that statement. Could it be a scenario where, a temple room, in a chapel, in a stake center? It reminds me of what I reported on during the summer about Russia, right? There's not a temple there, or is there? Because I talked to somebody who's connected to someone who's a liaison in that area saying saints are receiving temple ordinances. I'm just saying there's a lot out there. And I think things about temples and the way they're done, the way they're built, the way people worship in the temple, I think a lot of things are going to change, and I'll just leave it at that. But I think
And you
those
may be
statements
right, because
are loaded.
we gotta increase that 300 billion we've got in the bank. By the way,
That's exactly right.
with all due deference to your unnamed sources, do you think it's possible that you might be reading a little too much into what it was that President Oak said?
No, I don't think so, because if you go back, they don't say things by accident. We will move forward in providing the ordinances of the temple to members of the church throughout the world.
Most
He
people
didn't.
would think that means we're going to follow through and build the rest of the 100+ temples that are already
Oh, of
announced.
course, but he didn't say that, did he? He didn't say that at all, right? So and remember, we reported on a couple months ago, there will be a temple within an hour's drive of every single saint. They're not saying that in either. So I don't know. We'll see. What I will say is I think things are changing. I think President Oaks recognized that President Nelson loved to announce temples, whether it was just for the rah-rah factor or to stick it to Hinckley, and that day is done. They're going to change things up. They're going to be way more on the down low, with the buildings themselves, with the way they're announced, to just put all this bad PR away, right? Has there ever been more bad PR than temple PR? It's everywhere, right?
It is, Rebecca, and
So-
because of you, actually.
Oh, God, you keep throwing me under the bus. Anyway,
No.
those are
I'm
my thoughts
exalting
about
you
the
on
whole
high.
temple thing.
I'm exalting you on high. By the way, is there any way to go back through all the last 8 years of general conferences when President Nelson is giving the final talk and reading off his list of temples? And can we get a camera on Elder Oaks and see what he's doing
That's
while
an
that list is being read?
That's an interesting idea. And notice that in the last couple years, it used to be, and then they said, please refrain from making a sound, right? So I think even Nelson, or maybe that was Oaks, saying, we've got, this is turning into a circus. I think there's been a lot behind the scenes about this not being appropriate. And here it is. He's not even the prophet yet. First act, President Nelson is laying in state right now, and they've already done away with his favorite thing to do, the biggest thing that he does. That to me says something. And who knows what's going to happen next.
And they got rid of the revealed list of names for the next 18 or so temples that we'll never know about.
We'll never
By
know.
the way, this is the other point I want to make about this, okay? Because if this is correct, and except for your, those kind of paranoid delusional things you have over there on the
thank you very
on the
much.
fringe, this part I think is solid, okay? That they had a list, they pocketed the list, they got approval. Okay, we're not going to announce anymore. Okay. If that's correct, and I think it is, why don't you just tell us that's what happened?
No, it's
Why
not a
do
good
you have
look.
to engage? And I'm so sorry. It was a rhetorical question, but would you like to try and answer it?
No, I just said it's not a good look. You have to protect the organization at all costs.
Yeah. Why don't you just tell us what you did? Why do you always keep us in the dark? Why do you use words and twist them to deceive us and make us think you're doing something that you're not doing? Why do you do that to us? That's my question.
We'll never know.
Why don't you just come out and say, he had a list of temples. We've got so many going on, and we got other things to do. We're not going to announce them at this time. We're going to put them, because we got to build the ones that are announced. Everybody would understand that. We got to build the ones that are announced. And once we got these built, then we'll come back to this list and we'll announce it and we'll go on from there. Everybody would get that. Nobody's going to have a problem with that. But that's not where they go to. They don't go to being honest with us. They go to being deceptive.
Mic drop. All right. I think that's the end of temples.